going to go from southwest to northeast. That's the direction the wind is going to push it. It's going to push it then up onto these south or southwest facing slopes. It's going to push it to go up those slopes. When it goes up a slope, the heat produced by the fire rises and goes ahead of the flames, preheats the vegetation, and you have a positive cycle, positive feedback. That just, you just get a roaring fire going up south and west facing slopes. That fire is going to roar up those slopes. It's going to incinerate everything. That's the situation that almost always happens in the West when firefighters are killed. They get caught in a situation on the top of a slope, and the fire roars up that slope at them, and they can't get out of there. What happens when that fire roars up this big blue, red arrow means it's roaring up this slope, fire-prone environment. Comes over to the top and now goes down a north or northeast facing slope. Well, now that fire is going down. It's going down the slope. The heat is going behind it. Heat is always going to rise. This fire is always going to be burning into cool fuel. The fuel is not going to get preheated like it does on the south and west side. So what happens on a north or northeast facing slope, also because those slopes are usually damper, because they don't get as much solar radiation, the fuel is wetter or damper, the fire will probably still go, but it's going to be much reduced. And I put this in blue splashes, meaning more patchy. It's going to be just kind of patchily working its way, burning whatever it can find that's dry enough to burn. That's going to leave some woody plants free from getting burned by fire. That's why we see savannas on north and east facing slopes, because of the patchy fire that has occurred there, helping to protect them. Here's where, again, I call this a fire-protected environment, because the fire is much less vigorous on those slopes. So here's that answer to the question about Iowa. If you look at this river valleys, there's the Iowa Divide, you can see right there. The rivers on this side of the divide mainly flow from northwest to southeast. Every single one. Except right up in here, they're a little more north. On the west side, they flow, of course, from northeast to southwest, towards the Missouri. Fire moved across this landscape, again, under natural conditions, blown by the southwesterly flow of air, warm air coming. And so that means on this side of Iowa, fire always had to go through river valleys. Fire can't go through river valleys very well. That means it has to go down a slope. I just showed you what happens when it has to go down a slope. It's not going to burn very well. It has to cross a river. This area over here then meant that fire was not very as effective in keeping trees down. And so we see a lot more trees over here because of that. Whereas on this area, those fires parallel with the river valleys. They're moving parallel with those river valleys. The river valleys over here do not make an impediment to that fire. They can just roar right up those river valleys without any problem. So far fewer trees in the western third of Iowa. Fire effects, I'll go through this fairly fast. I know I'm getting towards the end here. There's quite a few fire effects. There's microclimate effects here. More solar radiation, of course, because the litter's gone. There's more rain that gets through because the litter's gone. These are all things that happen because there's no more litter there. Then there's a long list of things that happen in terms of species. There's going to be animals that die. So when you do a burn, realize you're going to kill something out there. Something's going to die, because what's going to survive that kind of intense flames and heat if it's exposed? If it's something that's exposed, it doesn't have a chance unless it can get out of there. So you have to realize that that's going to happen. You're also probably going to see some mortality to fire-sensitive plants, at least top killing. Fire is certainly going to top kill almost any plant that it comes across, of course. That means to kill the top part of the plant. Perennial plants grow back, and that's what makes a prairie plant a prairie plant. This happened to it hundreds of times in its evolution, millions of times in its evolution, and this adapted well to growing back from those prairie fires. Reduced parasites, pathogens means that there might be more productivity because the fire kills them. You can see increased predation because there's less habitat cover for things, for ground squirrels. I was burning the Drake Prairie, a little tiny prairie about the size of this room on Drake's campus. I burn it every year, and one year I burned that in May, usually in May. It's a real simple burn, of course, because there's just green grass all the way around it. But as I was burning it, it wasn't unusual to see a few animals run out. So that's one way they escape fire, of course, is they run away from the fire. And this rabbit ran out of the prairie as the prairie was beginning to burn. And just as it ran out into the prairie, onto the lawn, a red-tailed hawk swooped down and grabbed it. That's how nature works. Different competition outcomes because of the effect of the fire. Herbivory usually increases because of the regrowth that comes back after the fire. It's more nutritious. Fire-adapted species will increase, generally. Increased growth because of the invigoration, the effect that the fire has. That means more food then for all of the animals that live on that prairie. Increased seed production. More food for consumers, increased seed dispersal, increased germination of seeds. A lot of things happen. I could talk about this for an hour or more, and we don't have that time. But just the importance is that fire has a huge important role. And if you don't have fire happening on a prairie, then it's missing a very important factor. Herbivory, another very important factor. Bison, elk, mule deer, white-tailed deer, probably lesser effect of these two on our prairies, but certainly these two were very important herbivores. Elk probably were more numerous in Iowa than what bison were, so very important effect by them. And this is just, again, to show you that herbivory fire has a combination of herbivory and fire has a very important effect on what the prairie looks like in terms of the amount of grasses, on the amount of forbs. So forbs are the non-grasses. They're the plants that don't have really beautiful flowers, broader leaves. Prairies are made up of both grasses and forbs, both. And so kind of what's the ratio of those is always kind of important. What this is showing you is that bison and fire have a very important effect on where we are on this gradient. Are there more grasses or are there more forbs? And it's a real kind of an interesting thing, I think, for you to see when I'm going to show this to you. Let's say that we have low bison. For some reason, the bison haven't been in the landscape very much. They've been someplace else. If the bison aren't around, that means they're not eating the grass. That means there's going to be high fuel amounts because that grass has not been eaten by bison. It's going to become fuel. Well, if there's high fuel, that means now that's going to make it more likely to be burned. If lightning happens and a fire happens, that's going to make it more likely to actually get burned. That means you have a more recent burn. A more recent burn is going to attract the bison. Now they'll come to that area that was burned because that's where the grasses are more nutritious. They're more higher quality of food for them to eat, so they are attracted to those burned areas. And so since the bison are there, now they're going to eat most of that, and there won't be very much fuel. So now there's not very much fuel, so that means that there's not going to be a chance for a burn to happen because there's not much fuel, and that means that eventually you're going to be back to low bison. And this is just a cycle that works its way through over time. I'm going to speed up, so what you said about a quarter after or so?
Yeah, that'd be good. Anytime you, just as long as you want.
Okay, well, I'll speed up a little bit. There's a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. Are you burning all the natural grass? I mean, is that a burn every year you're doing on these prairie grasses?
So every manager looks at that differently. no, you probably would not want to burn every year. What my 2 cents on that is, when I tried to stress this to land managers, you should use fire when you're managing grasslands or prairies. But you should always have a reason for doing the burn. You should be able to say, I'm going to do a burn because I want this and this to happen. I want to reduce woody vegetation, or I want to reduce non-native grasses like brome and bluegrass. Fire can be used for that. And if that's what you want to do, great, then you express the reason to use a burn. That also then helps you figure out what kind of burn you should use and when you should burn. Because what you want to try and accomplish with a burn depends upon when you do the burn. So I've seen a lot of times, it seems like to me sometimes land managers just go out and burn because it's fun to burn and they know that they're supposed to burn, so let's just go out and burn. But to me, a lot of burning happens way too early, because if they're burning like right now, and you have a prairie, almost every single prairie has pasture grasses in it, exotic, non-native pasture grasses, brome, bluegrass, fescue. I mean, they're everywhere. And so if you burn right now a prairie that has those kinds of non-native problem grasses, you're just going to help those grasses, because that's going to be good for them. So, if you want to try to, say you want to try to push back on brome, research shows that the best time to do that is early May, not middle of March. Research I did down in southern Iowa actually showed when we burned pastures in March, we got an increase in the non-native pasture grasses. Exact opposite of what you want to have.
So are weeds a problem in these prairie crossings that you have?
Weeds?
Weeds.
They can be.
I mean, weeds are everywhere.
Yeah, so invasive species, yes, they can be. It depends on what the land management history has been, what the previous use was by the landowner that owned the land and probably farmed it. But yes, that's another reason to use fire, to try to have a negative impact on things that aren't native. Again, like I said previously, one of my philosophies is that if you want to try to make a prairie more prairie-like, and get rid of the non-native, Euro-American or whatever, wherever they came from, weeds, make the environment more like a prairie. That means using fire, because fire is something that separates things that are adapted for fire and belong in a prairie from species that are not adapted to fire and don't belong there because they came from some other part of the world. So yes, the short answer is yes, fire can be used in many ways to attack different problems that you've got. But again, you have to look at each problem separately and try and figure out what's the best way to use fire. When's the best timing to use fire?
How about patch burn versus an entirety burn?
Always patch burn. Because of the fact I said you're going to kill something. Every time you set fire to a piece of grass, you're going to kill something out there. There's going to be some insects or some small mammals, or maybe some reptiles that can't get out of the fire. I mean, if you look real hard after you do a burn, you can usually find a charred little brown snake or something like that. Yeah, that's going to happen. And that happened on the native landscape too. That hasn't changed. But again, on the native landscape, the whole prairie wasn't burning at one time. There were always places that didn't burn. And so again, that's the strategy now that I think most land managers use for like a Tipton prairie. Burn maybe a third of it, or at the most half of it, and always leave some unburned part of the prairie there for organisms to go to that no longer have a prairie until it grows back, or again for them to escape. So, prairie floorings versus, I've already got 10, I'm on number 7, so I'll try to speed this up. Some of this rest of it won't take so long. Here I just want to try to point out how incredibly important the diversity and the number of plants on prairies. I'm a botanist, so I especially like plants, I guess you might say. I work with plants. And so, just saying here, the plant species richness, that's simply the number of species. Richness is just the number of species, of plant species, on prairies is way more than in our forests and wetlands. Way more. You could have 30 to 40 plant species in a square meter. That's the size of this card table. 30 to 40 different plant species in that little area right there. not all prairies will be that diverse. 20 to 25 is probably average, but it could be in exceptionally diverse prairies, 30 to 40. There's actually a grassland in Czechoslovakia that had 89. It was not a prairie, but it was a grassland. Prairie doesn't exist in Czechoslovakia, but they have grasslands, much like our grasslands. The point is, grasslands have more diversity than forests and wetlands. A 40-acre remnant, maybe you could have 200 plant species. Iowa's got about 1,600 native plant species. Over half of them were plants that grew on prairies. Because Iowa is covered by 85% prairie. So it's not unusual to think that over half of our plants are prairie species.
Share how many you found at Tipton.
Oh, what is the number? I should have looked that up. I think there was 180.
I think so.
I don't have the report in front of me.
I think it's.
That's a 3-acre
Yeah.
piece of land, 180 species. That is, again, incredible diversity. And Tipton, by the way, Tipton is a prairie that could easily be a state preserve. It's that good. Now, whether it becomes a state preserve, that's another question. But it, in my mind,